It was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. The eve of my wedding, the air in Savannah thick with magnolia and salt, the kind that clung to your skin and whispered of summer promises. My mother knocked softly before entering, her silhouette framed by the golden hallway light. "For your nerves, sweetheart," she said, holding a porcelain teacup that shimmered under the chandelier. I smiled, exhausted from rehearsals, trusting her like I always had. The tea tasted sweet, then faintly metallic, a bitterness I tried to ignore. Within minutes my eyelids grew heavy, my vision swimming. Somewhere in the distance my mother's voice wavered, pleading, "Don't make me choose." And then my sister's shriek split the night. "Cut her hair off or you'll lose me forever." The buzzing of clippers followed a sharp, violent hum that filled the room as I sank into darkness. The last thing I remember was the smell of my mother's perfume, mingling with burnt hair and betrayal. I woke to laughter somewhere far away, or maybe I dreamed it. The line between reality and nightmare blurred as the sedative pulled me under again. The tea had been warm, comforting, like every lie my mother ever told. She always wrapped cruelty in kindness. When I was little, she used to say, "Pretty girls forgive faster." Even then, forgiveness felt like obedience. Tonight it tasted like poison. Hours earlier, everything had seemed perfect. The mansion buzzed with preparations, caterers, florists, the hum of last-minute perfection. My father had given his usual sermon about honor and appearances before retreating to his study. My mother fluttered through the halls like royalty, her pearls clicking softly against her neck. And Lily, my younger sister, my parents' golden child, had spent the evening posting filtered photos of herself in the bridesmaid dress she'd chosen without my consent. She had always found ways to make my milestones hers. Graduations, birthdays, even job offers. Somehow she always became the main character. I used to think it was unintentional, that her need for attention came from insecurity. But that night, watching her twirl before the mirror, I saw something else triumph. When Mother brought the tea, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was trying to be kind. She called it chamomile, her little southern secret for nerves. The steam rose between us, fragrant, deceptive. Her hands were steady as she handed it over, but her eyes flickered quick like a storm warning. "You need rest, Emma," she said softly. "Tomorrow is important. We can't have you looking exhausted." I thanked her because gratitude was my second language in that house. I sipped. Warmth spread through me, slow and syrupy, pulling at the edges of my consciousness until the walls themselves seemed to sigh. The first wave of dizziness came gentle as a tide. I blinked, trying to steady the room, but everything began to tilt, the chandelier light stretching like liquid gold. "Mom," I murmured, my voice slurring. "What's in this?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile she gave reporters at church fundraisers, practiced hollow. "Just love, darling." My knees buckled. I clutched the edge of my vanity porcelain against marble, and the teacup slipped from my hand, shattering across the hardwood floor. My reflection swam before me, two eyes wide with confusion, mouth forming words that no longer made sense. The door burst open. Lily's voice cut through the haze, shrill, trembling with fury. "You always get everything. She doesn't deserve this day, Mama. She doesn't deserve him." Lily, Mother warned, but her tone lacked conviction. "Stop it. No." Lily's sob twisted into a scream. "If you don't do it, I'm gone. I mean it. I'll leave. You'll lose me forever." Through the fog, I tried to move, to say something, but my limbs betrayed me. My head swam. I could barely lift my hands as Mother's voice cracked, whispering, "Please don't make me choose." But the decision had already been made long before tonight. I heard the metallic click of something, clippers, a sound that didn't belong in a bedroom draped in lace and family portraits. The hum started low, then louder, closer. The first pass of the blades ripped through my hair. I felt it, not pain exactly, but pressure and heat like fire against my scalp. My body jerked, but my voice wouldn't come. Each stroke vibrated through the bed frame, through my bones. Hair fell around me like dark rain. My mother sobbed as she worked, but her tears didn't slow her hands. Lily's breathing quickened. I could hear the satisfaction in it. "See?" she whispered. "Now we're even." I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake up, but the sedative was a tidal wave pulling me under again and again. Snatches of sound floated through the dark, my father's voice calm and detached, saying something about avoiding scandal, about how she'll forget by morning. Another laugh, male unfamiliar, echoed faintly from the hall. That sound anchored itself deep inside me the moment I realized this wasn't just madness, it was orchestration. Someone else had watched. Someone had enjoyed it. When I opened my eyes again, I was on the bed, half covered by my mother's silk robe. My scalp tingled where the air touched it. The room smelled of hairspray and antiseptic. My mother was whispering a prayer. Lily's perfume lingered like sugar rot. The vanity mirror faced me, but I couldn't bear to look. Not yet. The clock read 3:08 a.m. My wedding day had already begun. A flicker of thought pierced the drugged fog. Daniel. What would he think? Would he even recognize me? The fear was sharp enough to cut through the numbness. I tried to sit up, but my body felt foreign, disconnected. My hand brushed against the short stubble on my head, and that single texture, the roughness of what used to be mine, made the truth undeniable. They had done it. My family. My blood. Outside, cicadas screamed into the humid night, their endless chorus vibrating through the walls. The sound blended with the ghost of the clippers, the rhythmic hum that had become my personal nightmare. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles, and somewhere deep in my mind a spark flared, small, defiant, alive. They had taken everything they thought made me beautiful. But beauty had never protected me. It had only made me easier to control. When the house fell silent, I pushed myself upright, unsteady, but conscious enough to reach for my phone. It wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. My mother had thought of everything. The room was stripped of agency, no clock within reach, no keys, no car outside the gate. Just me and the hollow echo of what I used to believe family meant. I sat in the dark, counting the seconds between each drip of the faucet in the adjoining bathroom. Each drop felt like a metronome ticking toward dawn. In the mirror across the room, I saw only a faint shape, me, but not me. My reflection shimmered, warped by tears I hadn't realized were falling. "They cut my hair," I whispered, to the empty air. Saying it made it real. They drugged me. Saying it again made it final. Somewhere downstairs, a door closed softly. I thought of my mother returning to bed, wiping away her tears, telling herself she had done what she must to protect Lily, to protect the Calloway name. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't madness, it was legacy. Generations of Southern women sacrificing daughters to maintain appearances. I had become the newest offering. As my head throbbed and the sedative began to fade, a thought rose clear and sharp through the fog: tomorrow they will tremble. Not because I'll scream or beg, but because I'll stand. They think I'll hide, that shame will silence me. But I know the truth now. Their love was never unconditional, it was transactional, and the price was my dignity. The ceiling blurred again as exhaustion pulled me down, but I clung to that single promise. Dawn would come. The house would wake. And this time I wouldn't be the one shrinking in their shadow. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the wreckage, something new was forming, anger sharpening into purpose. The last thing I saw before sleep reclaimed me was my reflection catching the faint moonlight through the curtains. A ghost with a bare scalp and burning eyes. I didn't know it yet, but she wasn't a ghost at all. She was the beginning of my revenge. The morning sunlight crept through the lace curtains, casting soft golden stripes across the room. For a brief, impossible second, I almost forgot what had happened. Then the ache behind my eyes returned, heavy and familiar, and when I lifted my hand to my head, my fingertips brushed against uneven stubble. My scalp burned. My breath caught halfway in my throat. It wasn't a dream. They really had done it. The air smelled of roses and hairspray, remnants of the chaos from the night before. Someone had left the window open. Outside, a mockingbird sang as if the world hadn't just cracked in half. I heard footsteps approaching before I could move. The door opened with its usual creak, and my mother stepped inside carrying a silver breakfast tray as if we were starting an ordinary Sunday morning. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, her voice too calm. "You need to eat something. Big day ahead." Her eyes slid over my head, lingered for half a second, and then pretended not to see. "You drugged me," I whispered. The words tasted like rust. She didn't even blink. "You were anxious. I gave you something to rest. Weddings are stressful." The casual tone was more terrifying than anger. She set the tray down and adjusted the napkin like she was staging a magazine cover. "Let's not dwell on things that don't matter. You'll feel better after breakfast." I stared at her in disbelief. "You cut my hair." She smiled faintly, the same rehearsed smile she used at charity luncheons. "Don't be dramatic, Emma. It's only hair." Then she turned to smooth the bedsheets, ignoring the tremor in my hands. I realized then that she wasn't going to apologize. In her mind, nothing unforgivable had happened. She was already rewriting it. By the time she left, I couldn't breathe in that room. The scent of her perfume clung to everything. I got up dizzy and went to the mirror. The woman staring back was almost unrecognizable, pale, hollow-eyed, stripped bare. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Maybe I'd used them all up years ago. Downstairs, the house buzzed with movement. The Calloway mansion never stopped performing, especially on a day like this. I could hear staff rushing doors, slamming, the faint hum of the air conditioner that never quite reached this room. When I was a child, I used to think the house itself could feel. Now it felt like a stage, every hallway rehearsed, every smile part of the script. At 8 o'clock sharp, I made myself go downstairs. The breakfast room smelled of coffee and burnt toast. My father sat at the head of the table reading the newspaper, every inch the image of composure. Lily was already there, wearing one of my silk robes, her golden hair brushed into waves. She looked up and froze for a moment when she saw me. Then she smirked, eyes glittering. "Wow," she said softly, bold choice. Father folded his paper and cleared his throat. "Your mother tells me you had an episode last night." He didn't look at me. "You've always been sensitive." "An episode?" My voice cracked. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "You drugged me, and you let her." He raised a hand sharply, the same way he used to silence me at dinner when I was a child. "Watch your tone. We will not make a scene on your wedding day." My chest tightened. "A scene? You shaved your daughter's head and you're worried about a scene." "Sit down, Emma," my mother said quietly, walking in with her coffee cup. "You're shaking. You need to eat something." Lily sipped her juice, pretending to be amused. "Maybe we can find you a fancy scarf," she murmured. "Grace Kelly vibes." I wanted to throw something at her, but the exhaustion was too heavy. I sat down instead. Every eye in the room was on me, waiting for me to behave. It was a ritual I knew well: rage, then silence, then pretending nothing happened. That was the Calloway way. Father finally folded the newspaper and placed it neatly beside his plate. "You've always misunderstood us," he said, his voice soft, patronizing. "Everything we do is for you. For this family's reputation." "For reputation," I repeated. "Not love." He frowned as if I'd used profanity. "Love and duty are the same thing in this house." Lily laughed short and sharp. "Maybe for some of us." The silence that followed was suffocating. I excused myself before I said something I couldn't take back. As I left the room, I heard my mother's voice behind me, weary and exasperated. "She's just emotional. She'll thank us one day." I walked through the house like a ghost. Every photo on the wall showed a perfect family smiling at charity galas and debutante balls. My mother shaking hands with mayors, my father cutting ribbons at the courthouse. I wondered how many people would still smile if they saw what those hands were capable of behind closed doors. In my old room, the vanity gleamed under the light. My phone was missing, of course. My mother had thought of everything. But she hadn't taken my laptop. I turned it on mostly out of defiance and saw something unexpected, a faint notification on the home screen, doorbell camera motion detected at 11:47 p.m. The breath caught in my throat. The doorbell camera. My father had installed it last month, bragging to everyone at church about his state-of-the-art security system. It automatically uploaded footage to the cloud. I clicked the notification. The app demanded a password I didn't have, but the realization hit me like a jolt of electricity. Someone else might. Aunt Grace. Grace had always been the outcast, my mother's older sister, stubborn and outspoken, the one who refused to play the Southern belle role. When I was little, I adored her. When I grew up, my parents warned me she was a bad influence. I hadn't seen her in months, not since she'd accused my father of mishandling their mother's estate. I remembered her telling me once, truth always has a way of keeping receipts. Maybe the truth had finally kept one for me. I sat there for a long time trying to steady my breathing. Through the window, I could see the manicured gardens where we used to host Easter luncheons. My mother was outside now giving orders to the florists, her voice clipped and precise. It was like watching an actress who refused to break character even after the curtain had fallen. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. The door creaked open, and Lily slipped inside. She closed it behind her, leaning against the frame, with her arms crossed. "You shouldn't be so angry," she said after a pause. "Mom just panicked. You always make things dramatic." I stared at her. "You told her to do it." "I heard you." Her face flickered fear, then arrogance. "You've always been the favorite. Even the score. The favorite." I laughed bitterly. "You had everything. You still do." She took a step closer. "You think this changes anything? You'll still walk down that aisle. Because if you don't, they'll fall apart, and we'll all go down with them. Maybe that's what needs to happen." Her jaw tightened. "If you ruin this, Emma, you'll regret it." "No," I said quietly. "I already regret staying silent this long." She didn't have an answer for that. She turned on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. I stood by the window again, heart pounding. The house felt smaller now, like it was shrinking around me. Somewhere downstairs I heard my mother laughing for the benefit of the caterers, her perfect hostess voice carrying through the halls. The same woman who cut my hair 12 hours ago. For the first time I saw her clearly, not as a mother, not even as a villain, but as a woman terrified of losing control. She had built her life on lies so fragile that truth itself felt like fire to her. I wasn't sure how I would do it yet, but I knew one thing I wouldn't hide. They'd taken my voice for the last time. I looked back at the mirror. The bald woman staring back at me didn't look broken anymore. She looked like someone who had stopped being afraid. Outside, church bells began to ring in the distance. My wedding day had arrived, but so had something else, a reckoning. And this time the silence wouldn't belong to them. The morning light slipped across my face like a blade. I opened my eyes to the sound of wedding bells in the distance, echoing through the open window. My first thought was confusion. The second was dread. The air smelled of roses and hairspray, clinging to my skin like a memory I couldn't wash away. I reached up, touched my head, and felt the uneven bristle of stubble under my fingers. It was real. Every nightmare from the night before had followed me into daylight. I sat up slowly, the room spinning for a moment. The clock read 6:30. My wedding was in less than 5 hours. My dress hung on the wardrobe door, a perfect ivory silhouette mocking me with its promise of beauty and tradition. I tried to stand, but felt weak, like the air had been sucked from my lungs. The house was alive, with movement below, footsteps, voices, the metallic clatter of dishes. Life went on as though nothing unspeakable had happened in this very room. A knock came at the door. I didn't answer, but it opened anyway. My mother stepped in, dressed in a pale pink robe and pearls, looking polished, serene, in control. She carried a white garment bag and the faint scent of jasmine. "You need to start getting ready, darling," she said, as if I were simply nervous, not mutilated by my own family. I stared at her reflection in the mirror instead of turning around. My voice came out quieter than I expected. How can you look at me? Her tone never wavered. Because I have to. I wanted to scream, but the words died in my throat. She unzipped the garment bag and pulled out the gown, smoothing the lace with her manicured hands. We'll cover it with the veil. It'll be fine. You'll look radiant. I don't want to hide it, I said, my voice trembling. Don't be foolish. Something inside me hardened. You made me look like this. She froze for a fraction of a second before forcing another calm smile. Everything we do is for you. I know you don't understand now, but one day you'll thank me. I turned to face her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. I never will. Her lips tightened. She didn't argue. She simply left, closing the door quietly behind her. The silence afterward was unbearable. I turned to the mirror, seeing myself fully for the first time. The woman staring back was both familiar and foreign. My scalp gleamed faintly under the light, my eyes hollow but alive. For a long time I just looked. Then slowly I stood and pulled the dress from its hanger. The fabric whispered against my skin as I slipped it on. The lace scratched at my shoulders, too delicate for the kind of strength I suddenly needed. The door opened again, this time without knocking. Two stylists entered, all smiles and polite energy, holding makeup brushes and curling irons. "Morning, Miss Calloway," one chirped. "You look beautiful already." I nearly laughed. They froze when they saw me, their smiles faltered eyes darting toward my mother in the hallway. "It's fine," I said quickly. "Go ahead," one of them stammered. "Would you like us to cover your—" "No," I interrupted. "I want to see it." The older woman hesitated but nodded. They began their work in silence, applying soft makeup that couldn't disguise the rawness underneath. When they were done, one of them whispered, "You look strong, strong." It was the first honest thing anyone had said to me since this nightmare began. When they left, I stayed by the mirror, lifting the veil that lay folded on the vanity. The sheer fabric shimmered in the light. For a long moment, I considered covering my head, disappearing behind something safe. But then I thought of the night before, the clippers, Lily's voice, my mother's trembling whisper, my father's silence. I draped the veil over my shoulders instead, letting it fall behind me like smoke. If they wanted me hidden, they were about to be disappointed. A soft knock broke the quiet. I turned to see my father standing in the doorway. His suit was immaculate, his expression carved in stone. "You look lovely," he said, though his eyes couldn't meet mine. "You let them do this," I said. He sighed, rubbing his temple. "Your mother lost control. It was an emotional mistake. Let's not ruin today with more drama." I stared at him, disbelief turning to disgust. "An emotional mistake you watched. You didn't stop her." "Emma," he said sharply, the authority of a judge returning to his tone, "you will not embarrass this family today. The Calloway name carries weight, and you have responsibilities. I don't owe you my dignity," I snapped. He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "You've always had a flair for rebellion. But this family survives because we keep our private matters private. You'll walk down that aisle, you'll smile, and tomorrow no one will remember any of this." "I will," I whispered. He didn't answer. He just turned and left, closing the door with a click that sounded too final. When I was alone again, my hands shook. My father's words echoed in my head: private matters, survival, reputation. The Calloway commandments. They'd raised me to protect appearances at all costs, even if it meant burying the truth alive. But something in me had shifted. I was done being buried. Outside, the world was already assembling for the performance. Guests were arriving in pastel dresses and polished shoes. The organist was warming up at the church down the hill. I could hear laughter and polite chatter through the open window. A voice startled me. "You shouldn't stare at them." I turned to see Lily in the doorway, wearing her bridesmaid gown like a crown. Her hair was perfect golden curls cascading over her shoulders. Her eyes met mine, but she didn't flinch. "You don't have to make this worse," she said softly. "You mean for you?" Her jaw tightened. "For everyone. Mom's already a wreck." Just get through today and leave the rest behind. You cut my hair, Lily. There's no leaving that behind. Her composure cracked. I didn't mean for it to go that far. You always made her choose, and she always picked you. I almost laughed at the absurdity. You actually believe that her voice shook. You think you're better than me. That's why she did it. She wanted to show you she still had control. And you wanted to help. She didn't deny it. Instead, she placed a small box on the vanity. Inside was a wig, real hair, golden brown, styled into gentle curls. I bought this for you, she whispered. So people don't stare. I want them to stare, I said. They should see what you did. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. For once her guilt was hers to carry. She left without another word. I turned back to the mirror. My reflection looked calmer, now clearer. For the first time, I didn't look like my mother. I looked like myself, raw, scarred, alive. The knock came again, lighter this time. Emma. It was Daniel's voice. The sound of it broke through my armor, warm and familiar. I'm here, I said, though my throat ached. Through the door, his tone was soft. Your mother said you're not feeling well. Do you want me to come up? No, I said quickly. I'll see you at the altar. There was a pause. Then gently he said, Whatever's wrong, we'll face it together. His words steadied me in a way nothing else could. When I heard his footsteps fade, I pressed my hand against the door, wishing I could tell him everything. But not yet. Not like this. The photographer arrived soon after, cheerful and oblivious. He positioned us in front of the mansion for family photos. My parents stood beside me, smiles frozen, pretending everything was fine. The photographer raised his camera. Say, Calloway. I smiled for the picture, but it wasn't for him. It was for me because I knew the truth they were too afraid to face. This photograph would capture their lie forever. As they ushered me toward the waiting car, I caught sight of a figure parked across the street. A navy blue sedan. Aunt Grace's face behind the windshield, calm, steady, watching. She raised a hand in a small wave. I froze, then smiled faintly. Hope flickered sharp and sudden. Someone new. Someone I had seen. The driver opened the door, and I climbed inside, smoothing the dress across my knees. The engine started, and as the car pulled away, I looked back at the mansion one last time. The windows gleamed under the sunlight, flawless and deceptive like the people inside. I touched the back of my head, feeling the coarse edges of hair against my palm. It no longer felt like shame. It felt like a scar I could wield. They thought they'd stripped me of power, but they'd only peeled away the last of my fear. The church bells rang again, louder this time, carrying across the Georgia heat. My wedding day had begun. And so had my revenge. The church smelled of lilies and candle wax. My hands trembled as I clutched my bouquet, waiting inside the small bridal room. Laughter and conversation echoed faintly from the chapel beyond the closed doors. My heart beat too fast, each thud reminding me of the humiliation I carried beneath the lace and satin. Outside, the sky was a hard blue, almost cruel in its perfection. The sound of footsteps made me turn. Aunt Grace stood in the doorway, calm as ever, her navy dress pressed, her hair pulled back in a silver twist. Her eyes scanned me slowly, taking in my bare head beneath the translucent veil. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "What did they do to you?" I didn't answer at first. Words felt fragile, breakable. But when she stepped closer, her perfume citrus and smoke wrapped around me, grounding me somehow. "They drugged me," I said finally. "And then they cut my hair." Grace's eyes darkened. "Your mother and Lily," I said quietly. My father watched. Her jaw tightened. Of course he did. For the first time that morning, I felt like someone saw me. Really saw me. Grace reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "I already know something happened," she said. "Your mother called me last night, rambling." I didn't like the sound of her voice. So I drove to the house early this morning. I frowned. "You went there?" She nodded. The front porch light was still on. I saw clumps of hair near the trash bins. At first I thought it was a raccoon fight, but then I remembered your father bragging about his new doorbell camera. My pulse quickened. The doorbell camera. Grace smiled slightly. You remember the password he gave me last Christmas when I watched the house while they were in Hilton Head? He never changed it. My breath caught. You have access. She tapped her phone. Had. Now we both do. She opened a folder on her screen and held it out to me. My throat closed. There it was, the porch view from last night, time-stamped just before midnight. The front door cracked open. A blurry figure, my mother dragging something. My own limp body. I flinched, but Grace steadied me with a hand on my shoulder. Don't look away. You need to see what you're up against. The video was grainy, the sound muffled, but I could hear it clearly, my mother's voice shaking, Lily crying, then that awful buzz of clippers again. Grace paused it when my mother said, Please, Lily, don't make me choose. I stared at the screen, numb. Then came my father's voice, calm and detached from somewhere off camera. It's handled. She'll wake up confused. The air left my lungs. They planned it, I whispered. They all planned it. Grace put her phone away and looked at me for a long moment. This family's been sick for generations. You know that, right? I nodded, faintly remembering hushed stories of my grandmother's temper, of how she used fear like a weapon. Grace sat beside me, her voice low. Your grandmother was worse than Caroline. She locked me in the cellar once for speaking out, said she was teaching me respect. Our mother raised us to believe love means control. Caroline learned it well. I turned toward her. And you didn't, I left, she said simply. But I paid for it. She made sure I was the cautionary tale. Grace looked around the room, her gaze landing on the bouquet in my hands. That's how these families survive, Emma. By passing down silence. Someone has to break it. The words sank into me slowly. I'm supposed to walk down that aisle in 15 minutes. Then you'll walk, Grace said, standing. But not the way they expect. I frowned. What do you mean? She held up her phone again. This video. The world needs to see it. You don't have to scream or beg for justice. Just let them reveal themselves. How? There's a projector set up for the reception slideshow, isn't there? Your mother probably planned a montage of smiling photos and polite applause. I nodded weakly. She always does. Grace smiled, a sharp, knowing thing. Then we'll use her stage. I stared at her. You can make it play there. I know the coordinator, she said. She's an old friend. Give me the footage and I'll make sure it finds its way to the screen. My pulse hammered in my ears. They'll hate me. Grace touched my cheek. They already do, sweetheart. But after this, they'll fear you. And that's better. I sat in silence, trying to steady myself. Somewhere beyond the door, an organ began to play a soft prelude. Guests were finding their seats. I could almost picture their faces, the women with pearls, the men with polite smiles, all ready for another Calloway production. Grace leaned down. You still have time to choose. I closed my eyes. I already have. She nodded once, then slipped her phone into her purse. I'll handle the tech. You focus on walking out there like the truth itself. When she left, I felt the air shift. For the first time, I wasn't alone. I turned toward the mirror, studying the reflection staring back. The veil shimmered faintly under the light, transparent enough to reveal my scalp. My heartbeat slowed. This wasn't the face of the compliant daughter they'd raised. It was something stronger. The door creaked open again, but this time it was Daniel. He looked nervous, his tie slightly crooked, his hands twisting together. When he saw me, he froze. You look incredible, he said, though his eyes flicked up, startled to the bare skin beneath the veil. Are you sure? I asked softly. He stepped closer. I'm sure. There was a flicker of fear in his eyes, confusion too, but it wasn't rejection. He took my hand, thumb brushing over my knuckles. I don't know what's going on, but I'm here. You'll see soon, I whispered. Just stand by me. He nodded. Always. When he left, I could feel the weight of what was coming settle in my chest, not dread exactly, but anticipation. The coordinator appeared then, breathless. 10 minutes, Miss Calloway. I smiled faintly. I'm ready. Grace returned just as the coordinator disappeared. Her expression was calm, efficient. It's done. The files are loaded. When the reception starts, they'll play automatically. I exhaled, shaking slightly. Thank you. She reached for my hand and squeezed. You remind me of your grandmother in the best way. The woman she might have been if she'd ever found the courage to tell the truth. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? Grace's gaze softened. Truth isn't about right or wrong, Emma. It's about freedom. And you've been chained to their lies long enough. The music changed outside, an organ swell signaling the processional. My heart leapt to my throat. Grace straightened my veil and stepped back. Walk tall. Let them see what they created. I took one last look in the mirror. The girl I used to be was gone. In her place stood someone forged by betrayal and ready to wield it like a weapon. The door opened, sunlight pouring in. A hush fell over the hallway as the bridesmaids turned to look at me. Some gasped softly, others stared in silence. I didn't flinch. As I took my first step toward the chapel doors, I heard Grace's voice behind me, low but steady. They've spent their lives hiding behind faith and reputation. It's time those walls come down. I nodded once and walked forward. Each step echoed louder than the music, my veil trailing behind me like smoke. At the end of the aisle, Daniel waited, and beyond him, the people who had broken me, still believing they controlled the story. They didn't know that the story was already over. They just hadn't seen the ending yet. The chapel bells rang with a slow, solemn rhythm that seemed to echo inside my ribs. I stood alone in the small bridal waiting room, my hands trembling against the bouquet of white lilies. Outside, the murmur of guests floated through the air, polite laughter, rustling dresses, the kind of calm that only existed before disaster. The veil lay across the table beside me, sheer and delicate its edge, catching the sunlight that filtered through the stained glass window. I stared at it, wondering how something so light could carry the weight of everything that had been done to me. The mirror on the wall reflected a woman I didn't recognize. The gown fit perfectly, lace and silk, every detail chosen by my mother, but the person wearing it no longer fit the role. My scalp gleamed faintly beneath the veil's shadow. I touched it once just to feel the truth of it. My reflection didn't flinch this time. I whispered, almost to myself, they thought this would break me. A soft knock came at the door. Aunt Grace entered quietly, closing it behind her. She carried a small sewing kit and a flash drive in one hand, the same flash drive that held the video that would end everything. Her eyes softened when she looked at me. "You're not hiding it, are you?" she asked. I shook my head. "No more hiding." Grace smiled faintly, setting her things down on the table. "Good. The truth doesn't need to hide. It just needs a stage." She adjusted the veil, pinning it so that it framed my face rather than covering it. "When you walk through those doors," she said, "don't bow your head. Let them see what they've done and what you've survived." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Of course you are," she said softly. "Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about standing there anyway." She took a breath, glancing toward the window where the church courtyard shimmered in the heat. "The files are ready. Everything's set for the reception." I nodded, feeling my pulse quicken. The weight of what we were about to do pressed against me, but beneath it was something steadier, resolve. Grace straightened the lace around my neckline, her hands gentle but sure. "You remind me of your grandmother," she murmured. "She had your same stubborn fire. She never got the chance to use it." "She would have liked you more," I said. Grace smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe she'd have feared you. You're what she could have been if she'd ever stopped being afraid." Her words lingered as she stepped back, giving me one last look before she slipped out of the room. The silence she left behind was thick, almost sacred. I turned back to the mirror, watching my reflection breathe. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown. Then another knock came. This one, hesitant, uncertain. Emma Daniel's voice, soft and familiar. I opened the door a crack. His expression was tense, but kind worry etched across his brow. He looked at me, at my uncovered head, at the veil that framed instead of concealed, and I saw confusion flicker across his face. "You're beautiful," he said after a moment, his voice low and raw. "Even like this. Especially like this," he said. "You look like you." Something in me loosened. I didn't realize how much I'd needed to hear that until the words reached me. "I just need you to trust me today," I whispered. He stepped closer, his hand brushing mine. "I don't know what's happening, but I trust you." I wanted to tell him everything about the video, about what Grace and I planned, but the words stuck. "You'll understand soon," I said instead. He nodded. "Whatever it is, I'm here." He left as quietly as he came, and I stood there for a moment, breathing in the silence he left behind. I didn't know if I was about to lose him or not. But maybe love wasn't about keeping people safe from truth, it was about facing it together. A few minutes later, my mother appeared. Her perfume arrived before she did jasmine and powder, sweet and suffocating. "Darling," she said smoothly, stepping into the room as if nothing in the world was wrong. "You look perfect." I didn't answer. Her gaze flicked to my veil and her smile faltered. "You're wearing it wrong," she said. "It's supposed to cover your face." "No," I said simply. "It's supposed to reveal it." Something cold flashed in her eyes. "Don't be clever, Emma. Today isn't about rebellion, it's about family." "Family," I repeated, my voice breaking slightly. "Is that what you call it?" She hesitated, her mask cracking just enough for me to glimpse fear beneath the composure. "If you embarrass us today," she said quietly, "you'll regret it." "I already do," I said. Her lips parted, then closed again. For a long silent moment she studied me like she was trying to find the obedient daughter she'd spent years crafting. But she wasn't there anymore. Without another word she turned and left. When the door closed, I let out a shaky breath. My hands were trembling again. I picked up the small ivory ribbon Grace had left on the table, the one she said belonged to my grandmother. I tied it around the bouquet, securing it with a silver pin. "For every woman who stayed quiet," I whispered. "Not anymore." The organ music began to swell beyond the walls. The coordinator's voice called softly through the door. "It's time, Miss Calloway." I nodded, even though no one could see me. My knees wobbled slightly as I walked toward the mirror one last time. The reflection staring back at me was calm, unflinching. The bald head that once made me feel stripped and powerless now gleamed like a crown beneath the veil's pale shimmer. The doors at the end of the hallway waited. Through the frosted glass, I could see silhouettes of bridesmaids and ushers' guests turning in their pews. My pulse raced. The organ's chords deepened. Grace appeared beside me again, her face steady, her eyes proud. "Walk tall," she whispered. "You've already survived the worst. Everything after this is just truth." I nodded, my throat tight. The doors creaked open. Gasps rippled through the chapel. The light from the stained glass spilled across the floor, a kaleidoscope of reds and blues stretching toward me. I stepped forward, each footstep echoing softly against the marble aisle. My mother's face turned pale in the front pew. My father stiffened beside her, jaw clenched, his hands gripping the program like it was a weapon. Whispers rose from the crowd, soft, shocked, uncertain. I heard the words, "Bald, brave, poor girl." I didn't look at them. I looked at Daniel standing at the altar, his eyes wide but unwavering. Halfway down the aisle, the noise faded. The world narrowed to the sound of my own heartbeat and the distant hum of the organ. The veil fluttered lightly behind me as if caught in a breeze no one else could feel. When I reached the front, Daniel took my hand. His grip was warm, steady. The pastor cleared his throat, visibly unsure how to proceed. "Dearly beloved," he began, but the words felt faint background noise to the storm that had already broken. I could feel my parents' eyes burning into me. For the first time in my life, I didn't care. Daniel leaned close and whispered, "You're incredible." I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "I'm just done being afraid." And as the pastor's voice echoed through the chapel, I knew I had already taken back everything they'd stolen from me. My name, my body, my silence. The truth was walking with me now, right down the center aisle, under the stained glass light, toward whatever came next. The organ swelled heavy and beautiful, echoing through the vaulted ceiling as I took my first steps down the aisle. The air inside the chapel was thick with the perfume of lilies and magnolias, but beneath that sweetness was something sharper: fear. Every rustle of silk, every whisper from the pews pressed against me like invisible hands. The veil caught the light, casting a faint shimmer over my bare head. I saw eyes widen, lips parting in surprise, fans pausing mid-wave. The hum of gossip traveled like an electric current through the congregation. My father's arm stiffened beneath mine. He didn't look at me. His smile was carved in place, his jaw tight enough to crack. "Smile," he hissed through his teeth as we reached the halfway point. I murmured. "Just not for you." The music continued, slow and deliberate. My heart kept pace with it, every beat matching the organ's deep vibration. At the end of the aisle, Daniel stood waiting, tall, nervous, his eyes fixed on me. His face was unreadable at first, but when he truly saw me, his expression changed. Shock flickered there, confusion, maybe even grief, but not disgust. The whispers grew louder. "What happened?" someone muttered. "Did she shave it for charity?" another guessed. My mother sat in the front pew, rigid as marble, her hands gripping her clutch until her knuckles turned white. I reached the altar. The pastor smiled, awkwardly gesturing for my father to step aside. When he released me, his touch lingered too long, control disguised as affection. Then I turned toward Daniel, and everything else fell away. He leaned slightly toward me, voice low but trembling. "What happened, Emma?" I met his eyes. "My family happened." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The pastor hesitated, glancing between us, unsure whether to continue. Daniel's hand reached for mine. His thumb brushed my skin, gently grounding me. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," he said softly. "You just have to breathe." I wanted to cry right then, but instead I smiled. His words steadied me more than he could have known. The pastor cleared his throat. "We are gathered here to celebrate the union of." I barely heard him. The world had gone still, except for Daniel's hand holding mine. My father's stare burned the back of my neck, but I didn't turn. I could feel my mother's anger radiating across the aisle, her shame like heat. When the pastor invited us to exchange vows, Daniel spoke first. His voice trembled at first, but then grew strong. "Emma," he said, "I don't know what storms you've walked through, but I know you stand here stronger because of them. I promise to face every storm beside you." Gasps whispered through the crowd. A few heads turned toward my parents, who sat frozen, their smiles gone. Then it was my turn. I took a breath, the bouquet trembling slightly in my hands. "Daniel," I said, my voice shaking, "I've spent my whole life being told what I should be: quiet, perfect, obedient. But standing here, I know love isn't about perfection. It's about truth. You taught me that." The room fell silent. Even the pastor looked moved, blinking hard behind his glasses. When he finally pronounced us husband and wife, Daniel leaned in. The kiss wasn't long or dramatic. It was simple, steady, a promise in itself. The audience clapped, though some hesitated, unsure if they should. My mother didn't move. My father's hands rested on his knees, motionless, his jaw tight. As we turned to face the congregation, I heard someone whisper, "Poor thing. Her family must be mortified." Another voice, sharper, replied, "She looks radiant, braver than all of them." We walked down the aisle together, hand in hand. The music rose again, but this time I heard something different in it, a note of finality. The doors opened, flooding us with sunlight. For a moment I had to close my eyes against the glare. Outside, the world buzzed with polite applause and clicking cameras. The photographer's cheerful voice floated through the air. "Smile for me, Mr. and Mrs. Moore." Daniel squeezed my hand. "You did it," he whispered. I smiled faintly. "Not yet." The reception hall gleamed in the afternoon light, filled with white flowers and gold-trimmed table settings. Every inch screamed Callaway perfection. The guests moved between champagne flutes and laughter that sounded a little too forced. Daniel stayed close, introducing me to people whose faces I barely recognized. They congratulated me with careful smiles, each one pretending not to notice the veil that revealed rather than concealed. My mother approached eventually, her expression porcelain and brittle. "A word, dear," she murmured, her voice sugar and venom. Daniel glanced at me uncertain. I nodded, letting him go speak with friends. Caroline Calloway waited until we were out of earshot, then hissed, "What are you trying to do to this family?" I looked at her calmly. "Tell the truth." Her mask cracked just for a second. "You're humiliating us. You humiliated yourselves." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You have no idea how this looks." "I think everyone has a pretty good idea," I said, nodding toward the clusters of guests stealing glances at her. Her composure faltered. "You're ungrateful." "Ungrateful," I laughed softly. "You drugged me, cut my hair, and expected me to smile for photos." Her voice broke. "You'll regret this." "I already do," I said quietly, and walked away before she could answer. I found Daniel near the terrace talking to Aunt Grace. They both looked up as I approached. Grace's eyes were calm, sharp as glass. She handed me a folded napkin with a single word written inside, "Ready." My pulse quickened. "It's time," she nodded. "The slideshow starts in 20 minutes. Once the toast begins, the footage plays automatically. I made sure the coordinator won't interfere." Daniel frowned, confused. "What's going on?" Grace smiled gently at him. "The truth, dear boy. The truth is about to take its turn." He looked at me. "Emma," I took his hand, squeezing it once. "You'll see, just stay beside me." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. Laughter, clinking glasses, the soft hum of the band, all of it felt distant. I caught my father's voice somewhere behind me, low and anxious, whispering to Caroline. She was pale now, her movements stiff. Maybe she sensed what was coming. When the band paused and the MC called for attention, the crowd gathered near the dance floor. Before we begin the first toast, he announced, "Mrs. Calloway has prepared a special video in honor of the bride and groom." Grace caught my eye from across the room. A small nod. The lights dimmed. The projector flickered to life. For a few seconds, cheerful music played, a slideshow of me and Daniel smiling the Calloway mansion, a montage of perfect Southern life. The audience smiled, relaxed. Then the screen went dark. A faint buzz filled the speakers, followed by my mother's voice. "Please, Lily, don't make me choose." The room went silent. Then came Lily's shrill cry. "Cut her hair off, or you'll lose me forever." The sound of clippers buzzed through the speakers. Someone gasped aloud. A glass shattered. The image shifted, grainy night footage from the doorbell camera. My mother dragging my half-conscious body across the porch. My father's voice, "It's handled. She'll wake up confused." The air left the room. I stood perfectly still, Daniel's hand gripping mine. Grace remained near the projector, her posture composed, unflinching. My mother's sob cut through the silence. Turn it off right now," but no one moved. The footage ended, the lights came back on. Every eye in the room turned to me. I took a breath, steady and cold. "That," I said clearly, "is what family looks like when love means control." Gasps, whispers, disbelief filled the space. Caroline collapsed into a chair. My father tried to stand, but the weight of the moment pressed him down. Daniel looked at me, his expression stunned but full of quiet awe. I lifted my chin. "You wanted me to be silent. This is what silence sounds like when it finally breaks." And as the guests began to murmur, the truth hanging heavy in the air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, freedom pure and terrifying. The Calloway legacy was over, and I was the one who ended it. For a long, impossible moment, no one moved. The last echoes of the projector's hum died away, swallowed by the heavy silence that filled the hall. The image of my mother dragging me across the porch still hung in my mind like smoke. The crowd, 200 guests dressed in silk and champagne tones, sat frozen, their faces a mosaic of disbelief. A few clutched their pearls. Some avoided my eyes altogether. It was as if the air itself refused to breathe. The applause that should have followed the toast never came. Instead, Chairs creaked, glasses trembled, and somewhere near the back someone whispered, "My God." The words spread through the room like a draft, cold and sharp. Caroline's hand went to her throat. She looked like porcelain left too long in the sun, cracking, fragile, a thing pretending not to break. This isn't real," she stammered, standing abruptly. "It's been edited. Someone's tampered with it." Her voice pitched high, brittle. "It's fake." Grace didn't flinch. From across the room, she raised her glass and said softly, "It's not fake, Caroline. It's the truth." All eyes swung toward my mother. The socialite, the philanthropist, the church matron who'd ruled Savannah's charity circuit for 20 years now, shaking in front of everyone she'd ever manipulated. My father rose slowly beside her, trying to salvage what dignity he could. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "Everyone please," he said, his courtroom voice straining for control. "This is a private matter. It doesn't concern you." "Private," I said quietly, stepping forward. "You made sure of that, didn't you? You drugged your daughter and shaved her head to protect your image, and now it's private." The sound of my voice, calm, measured, seemed to shake them more than the footage had. The crowd watched, transfixed. Some looked disgusted, others fascinated. Every secret my family had built its reputation on was dissolving in real time. Caroline reached for my father's arm. "Henry, stop this," she whispered, panic curling around her words. "Do something." But Henry Calloway, the honorable judge, the man who'd sentenced others for lesser sins, had no defense left to give. His authority evaporated beneath the weight of the truth. He turned to me, his eyes cold and unfamiliar. "You think this makes you strong, Emma, destroying your family in front of strangers?" I met his gaze. "I didn't destroy it." "You did." "I just stopped pretending." A murmur rolled through the crowd. One woman, the pastor's wife, I think, whispered, "Bless her heart." Another whispered, "She's brave." Each word was a spark catching fire in the silence. Daniel stepped beside me, then his hand brushing mine. "You don't have to say anything more," he murmured. "They've said enough." But I shook my head. My hands weren't trembling anymore. "No, I do." I turned to face the guests, my voice steady. "This family has lived behind closed doors and charity events for decades, preaching morality while destroying anyone who didn't fit their image. They call it loyalty. I call it fear." The crowd parted slightly, eyes darting toward my parents. Caroline's painted lips trembled. Henry stared straight ahead, unblinking, his face an iron mask. But the cracks were there. The kingdom was falling. Then a sound cut through the tension, a sharp clatter. Lily had dropped her glass. She stood near the cake table, her face blotchy and red. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," she sobbed suddenly. "Mom said it would just teach her a lesson." Caroline turned horrified. "Stop it, Lily." But Lily's words tumbled out loud, messy, unstoppable. "You said if I didn't help, you'd cut me out of the inheritance, you said." Enough. Henry's voice boomed, but the damage was done. Every guest in the room had heard. The gossip would spread faster than wildfire now. The hall erupted into whispers. People stood backing away from the head table as if the Calloways carried a disease. A man near the front, one of my father's business partners, pointed a shaking finger. "You've been using church donations for this, covering up scandals." Henry's mouth opened, then closed. His silence was answer enough. Caroline sank into her chair, her face gray. "Please," she whispered, "please stop." The trembling in her hands made the pearls around her neck rattle softly like wind chimes in a storm. The projector flickered again, replaying a single frozen frame, the porch light catching my mother's face mid-lie. The image filled the wall, impossible to escape. She looked both powerful and terrified, a woman built entirely out of performance. Someone started recording on their phone. Another followed. Then everyone. In a world where reputation was everything, cameras were executioners. Caroline saw it happening, saw the crowd documenting her fall, and broke. Her voice came out as a strangled cry. "Turn those off, all of you." But no one did. I stood there watching as the people who once idolized her turned their backs. The Callaways, who had taught me that image was everything, were being undone by their own reflection. My mother swayed. Her hand caught the edge of the dessert table and the entire wedding cake toppled. The pristine white frosting splattered across the marble floor, a mess of sugar and ruin. Gasps rose, followed by a hush so complete it rang in my ears. Caroline crumpled into the chair behind her, sobbing softly. My father's shoulders sagged and he looked suddenly small. For the first time I saw not a tyrant but a man cornered by his own lies. "You've had your revenge," he said quietly. "Are you satisfied now?" I took a step forward. This was never about satisfaction. It was about truth. "You always told me lies protect a family. You were wrong. Truth does." He stared at me, his eyes hollow, his mouth tightening around words he couldn't say. Then he turned and walked out, leaving Caroline sobbing alone amid the wreckage of her perfect reception. The crowd began to disperse slowly, murmuring to one another, their faces pale with disbelief. Grace approached me through the chaos, calm as ever. "You did it," she said softly. "It doesn't feel like victory," I said. "It's not," she replied. "It's freedom. And freedom never comes quietly." Daniel wrapped his arm around my shoulders, his warmth cutting through the chill that had settled over me. Guests passed us with awkward smiles or sympathetic nods. No one dared meet my mother's eyes. Outside, the evening light bled into the horizon, painting the sky in orange and gold. The heavy doors of the reception hall swung open, letting the noise spill into the street. I stepped out into the air, letting it hit my skin clean and sharp. For the first time, the weight on my chest lifted. Behind me, Grace's voice carried softly through the doorway. "They wanted silence," she said. "You gave it back to them." I turned one last time. Inside, the chandelier light glinted off shattered glass and frosting-stained marble. My mother still sat there, surrounded by the ruins of her empire, shaking and whispering words only she could hear. The guests would leave. The gossip would live. And by morning, Savannah would have a new story to tell the day the Callaways fell. I looked at Grace. "It's over," I said. She smiled faintly. "For them, yes. For you, it's just beginning." Daniel squeezed my hand, and together we walked down the church steps, away from the hall into the cooling twilight. The cicadas hummed the same way they had the night before, when everything shattered. Only this time the sound didn't haunt me. It sounded like release. As we reached the car, I looked back one final time at the glowing windows. The reflection of my mother's empire flickered and dimmed, swallowed by dusk. "They thought silence was power," I whispered, "but it's truth that lasts." And then I turned away, stepping into the night that finally belonged to me. The sound of my mother's sobs followed me long after I left the reception hall. They echoed faintly through the grand foyer of the Savannah Heritage Club, blending with the low hum of voices and the occasional nervous laugh. No one dared speak too loudly. The chandelier's light seemed harsher, now throwing fractured reflections across the ruined cake and toppled champagne glasses. The perfect Callaway celebration had turned into a courtroom, and my family was on trial before everyone who had ever envied us. I stood near the entrance, Daniel's hand gripping mine tightly. His face was pale but steady, his eyes flicking toward me, then back to the scene unfolding in front of us. Caroline Callaway, my mother, was still seated at the head table, trembling, her perfect curls coming undone. Her makeup streaked down her cheeks, pearls broken and scattered across the marble floor like tiny confessions. My father hovered beside her, but even from a distance I could tell his strength had finally cracked. The mask of the respected judge had slipped away. A man in a gray suit, the president of the church board, stepped forward cautiously. "Judge Callaway," he said, his tone careful as what we saw. "True." My father's mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "This is a private matter," he began, voice brittle, "and I expect discretion from all of you." A ripple of whispers ran through the crowd. "Discretion," someone muttered. That's what he called it when they took her hair. The murmuring grew louder. The old order of politeness was unraveling. The same people who once worshipped my parents' social power now turned on them with the precision of sharks sensing blood. My mother rose shakily to her feet. "You don't understand," she pleaded, her southern accent trembling. "We were trying to help her. She's always been so unstable." I took a step forward. "That's your defense." My voice carried easily through the silence. "You drugged me, humiliated me, and your excuse is that I made you nervous." Caroline turned to me, her eyes wild and shining. "You're twisting everything we did, what any good parents would do." "You were hysterical." "Hysterical?" I laughed softly. "You mean human." The crowd shifted. I could feel them turning toward me, some sympathetic, others hungry for spectacle. Savannah society thrived on scandal. They were already rewriting the story in their minds. But I wasn't going to let them shape it for me again. "You want to know what kind of parents they were?" I said, my voice clear and steady. "Everything in this family was about appearances. About keeping up the image of the perfect Southern household while destroying anyone who didn't fit the part. My mother taught me that pain was something you cover with pearls. My father taught me that silence is how you keep a family together. But the truth," I paused, letting the weight of it land, "the truth doesn't care about your reputation." A woman near the front clasped her husband's arm, eyes wide. Another reached for her phone, pretending to text, but recording instead. Cameras flashed. I didn't flinch. Lily appeared at the edge of the crowd, her mascara smeared. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," she blurted, her voice cracking. "Mom said." "Lily, stop." Caroline snapped, but her daughter pressed on, her guilt spilling over. "You said if I didn't help you'd cut me off. You told me she needed to be taught her place." The hall erupted. Gasps, shocked murmurs, the clinking of glasses as people stepped back as though scandal might be contagious. My mother's face drained of color. My father turned sharply toward Lily, his tone deadly calm. "You have no idea what you're saying." "Yes, I do," Lily cried. "I saw you give her the pills." Caroline's hand shot out, slapping Lily across the face. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the room. Enough, I felt something inside me break, not from pain but from final clarity. I took a slow step forward. "You can't silence her anymore, Mother. You can't silence any of us." My father rounded on me. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed this family's name." "It wasn't me," I said. "You did that the moment you cared more about a name than the people wearing it." The gray-suited man from the church shook his head. "Judge Calloway, this is unforgivable." Another voice, this one from the back, called out, "He used donation funds for the church roof to pay for her charity dinners. I saw the receipts." Henry froze. "That's absurd." Grace stepped forward, then calm and precise, holding her phone like a weapon. "No, it isn't," she said. "The files were sent to the local press this morning. They'll run by nightfall." The collective gasp that followed was almost musical. My father stared at her, pale and defeated. Caroline sank back into her chair, whispering something over and over, too quiet to hear. The woman who had once ruled this town with her tea parties and false grace was now a ghost in front of her own kingdom. Daniel moved beside me, his arm wrapping around my shoulders. He didn't say anything, just held me steady as I faced the ruin of the family that had made me. "Please," my mother whispered, suddenly lifting her head. "Emma, make them stop." "Stop," I repeated. "You wanted silence. This is silence breaking." She reached for me, but I stepped back. Her fingers brushed the air where I had stood, as if she were trying to hold on to something that had never really been hers. Grace spoke again, her voice carrying over the noise. "What you did to her wasn't discipline. It was control. And now the whole town knows." Caroline's face twisted, half anger, half despair. "You think you've won. You think they'll love you for this." I shook my head. "I don't need them to love me. I just need them to see." The guests began to leave then, some in shock, others whispering into their phones. The Calloway dynasty was collapsing faster than the chandeliers could dim. The journalist from the Southern Gazette stood near the exit, already scribbling notes on a pad. The headline would write itself by morning. When the last of the crowd had gone, I stood in the center of the room, the smell of spilled champagne heavy in the air. Grace joined me, her expression unreadable. "It's done," I said quietly. "Not quite," she replied. "This was the first fall. The rest will come when the world decides what to do with them." Daniel looked around at the mess, the overturned tables, the shattered crystal, the family portrait that had fallen from the wall and split neatly in two. "You don't have to stay here," he said softly. I glanced at the broken portrait. The painted smiles looked ridiculous, now frozen in the lie that had kept us all captive. "No," I said, my voice low. "I think I do. I want to remember what truth looks like when it finally gets free." My mother's sobs had quieted to soft, broken breaths. My father stood motionless beside her, his head bowed, a man unmade. Lily sat alone near the cake table, staring at her trembling hands. I turned to Grace. "It's over." She shook her head gently. "For them, yes. For you, this is where it begins." I looked out through the open doors where twilight was bleeding into the horizon, the humid Georgia air still humming with the faint sound of cicadas. The night smelled of rain and redemption. I slipped my hand into Daniel's and walked toward the exit. Behind me, the last remnants of the Callaway Empire flickered under the chandelier light, glittering, dying, and finally silent. As we stepped into the evening air, I felt the wind catch my veil, lifting it like a ghost, finally leaving the body it haunted. And for the first time since the tea, since the clippers, since the moment my mother whispered, "Don't make me choose," I breathed without pain. Let them tremble, I thought. Let them face the silence they built. I was done living inside it. The headlines arrived before sunrise. Every front page in Savannah carried the same photo, my mother's frozen expression from the video. Still, her hand mid-reach, her pearls tangled, her eyes wide in horror. Beneath it, the headline in bold, "Judge Callaway and wife accused of drugging daughter before wedding." The story had broken faster than even Grace predicted. The footage leaked online overnight, shared by a dozen guests who couldn't resist posting it before they even left the reception hall. By dawn, it was everywhere. I sat on Grace's porch, the sea air thick with salt and morning mist, the paper folded beside my untouched coffee. The gulls cried overhead, indifferent to scandal. Daniel stood at the railing, his tie loosened, his eyes still red from sleeplessness. "They're going to hound you," he said quietly. "Reporters, old friends, strangers, they'll all want a statement." "I already gave them one," I said. "The truth." Grace stepped outside carrying another mug. "Truth doesn't stop gossip, sweetheart. It just changes its direction." She handed me the cup and sat beside me, scrolling through her phone. The Gazette isn't the only one. The Chronicle, WSAV News, even national outlets picked it up. They're calling it the Callaway scandal. Savannah's golden family undone by their own facade. I watched the ocean through the mist. The waves rolled slow and steady, unconcerned. "They'll survive it," I said finally. "They always do." Grace shook her head. "Not this time." By mid-morning, the calls began. Unknown numbers, journalists, talk show producers, documentary offers. I silenced my phone, but the notifications kept multiplying like weeds. My social media inbox overflowed with messages, some kind, some cruel. Words like brave, crazy, selfish, hero. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them knew me. Daniel knelt beside my chair, his voice low. "You don't owe anyone your story." "I think I do," I said. "Not to them, to myself." He didn't argue. He just squeezed my hand and went inside, leaving Grace and me on the porch. She pulled up an email on her tablet and slid it toward me. "There's more," she said. "Financial records. Church funds diverted into your parents' private accounts. Old property deeds. They used charity money to maintain their reputation. You were their mask, and when you cracked, they panicked." I stared at the screen. "You found this?" She nodded. "I've been keeping receipts since your grandmother's time." Your father stole the inheritance that should have gone to both of us. I let it go, but not anymore. Their power isn't just emotional, it's financial. That's what keeps people silent. What do we do with it? We expose it, she said simply. Every cent, every lie. The thought made my stomach turn. Another scandal, another explosion. But I knew Grace was right. It wasn't enough to show what they did to me. The world needed to see why. The first knock came before noon. A young journalist from the Gazette stood on the porch holding a recorder. "Mrs. Moore," she began, cautiously. "I know this is difficult, but people are calling you a symbol, someone who stood up against a legacy of Southern silence. Would you like to respond?" I looked at her bright, hungry eyes, and thought of all the women in this town who'd been told to smile through humiliation, to swallow truth for the sake of family honor. I met her gaze and said, "Tell them I'm not a symbol. I'm just the proof that silence always cracks." She nodded, scribbling notes, and left. By evening, the news had spread beyond Georgia. Commentators debated my motives on television, dissecting my hair, my tone, my dress, as though the act of surviving needed to be polished for public taste. I tried not to watch, but Grace did, pacing the living room like a general. "They can twist the story however they want," she said. "But every time they play that footage, your father's voice condemns him. My father. The thought of him made me shiver. The once untouchable judge was now suspended pending investigation. I'd seen his statement, a carefully worded piece of damage control, blaming a lapse in judgment and family misunderstanding. No apology, no ownership. Just the same smooth lies. That night I couldn't sleep. The cottage was quiet, except for the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. I got up and walked to the edge of the porch, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. The stars were faint through the haze, but the sea glowed faintly under the moonlight. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably hiding behind closed blinds, counting the ways to rebuild their power. Grace joined me a few minutes later, holding her laptop. "You should see this," she said. On the screen were the documents again: bank transfers, forged signatures, charity accounts drained. She clicked a button, sending the files to a journalist contact. "It's out of our hands now." I felt both relief and dread. "They'll hate us." "They already do," she said, "but hate can't hurt you if it has nowhere left to live." The next morning, the second wave hit. Callaway Foundation under fraud investigation. Judge's ethics panel to review conduct. The empire crumbled publicly this time. Caroline's photo appeared again this time, leaving her charity's office surrounded by cameras. She looked smaller, older, her beauty dimmed by the truth she couldn't control. Lily called that afternoon. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Her voice was thin, shaky. "I'm sorry," she said before I could speak. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. People are saying awful things. I lost my job. My fiancé won't talk to me." I closed my eyes, the ache rising again. "You helped them, Lily." "I know," she whispered. "But I was scared. Mom said if I didn't, she'd cut me off. I thought she'd change. I thought she loved us." "She does," I said quietly. "But her love is the kind that burns everything around it." She started crying. I listened, the anger fading into something heavier, pity, maybe even understanding. "What do I do?" she asked. "Tell the truth," I said. "That's how this ends." She didn't reply. When the line went dead, I felt both lighter and lonelier. Later that evening, Daniel found me sorting through boxes in the living room. Among the old family photos, I found one of my grandmother, a stern woman in pearls, her eyes cold even in black and white. On the back, she'd written in looping script, "We keep our roots polished even when they rot." I handed it to Grace. "Was she really that bad?" Grace nodded. "Worse. Your mother learned everything from her. The cruelty, the control, but the fear too." I looked at the photograph again. "Then it ends here." Grace smiled faintly. "That's why you're different." That night, another article appeared, one Grace had arranged anonymously. It detailed the full extent of the Callaway's corruption, complete with documents and timestamps. I didn't need to read it. I already knew how it ended. My parents would lose everything. The mansion, the foundation, their titles. I walked down to the beach just before midnight. The wind was cool, the tide pulling gently against my ankles. Daniel followed a few steps behind, silent, until he caught up. "You could walk away from all of this now," he said. "Start over. No one would blame you." I looked at the horizon. Maybe I don't want to walk away. Maybe I just want to see what truth looks like when it's finally free. He smiled softly, slipping his hand into mine. "Then, you already have." We stood there until the sky began to lighten. The first streaks of dawn painted the water in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in town, I knew my parents were waking to find the world they'd built gone. But out here, in the calm rhythm of the tide, I felt something close to peace. Grace's words came back to me, then quiet but certain. Freedom never comes quietly. The Calloway name had fallen, but the truth was still rising. And I was finally standing where I belonged, on solid ground in the open air, unashamed. The Calloway mansion looked different in daylight. The windows were boarded up, the hedges overgrown, the fountain cracked and dry. For years it had been a monument to control, a fortress built out of pride and appearances. Now it stood hollow, stripped of its illusions, like the carcass of a beast finally brought down. I parked at the end of the long driveway and just sat there for a while, watching sunlight filter through the oaks, trying to steady my breath. The key Grace had given me felt cold in my hand. "Every truth needs a burial," she'd said when she handed it over, and sometimes that means walking through the ruins. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled of dust and magnolia leaves. Each step up the cracked stone path stirred old ghosts, Christmas mornings, family dinners, the echo of my father's gavel-sharp voice, scolding me for speaking out of turn. The front door creaked as I pushed it open. The smell of polish and roses was gone. In its place lingered something faintly metallic, like time itself had begun to rust. The living room looked untouched, but the silence was heavier than I remembered. Family portraits still lined the walls, though most had been removed from their frames, ghostly rectangles of lighter wallpaper marking where they once hung. The grand piano sat closed, gathering dust. I traced a finger along its surface, remembering how my mother used to play hymns after dinner, her face soft in the candlelight. I'd thought then that it was love. Now I knew it was performance. A noise startled me, a soft thud from upstairs. For a moment I thought I was imagining it. Then I heard footsteps, slow and unsteady. I climbed the staircase, the railing cold under my palm. At the top landing I found her. Caroline sat on the floor outside her old bedroom, still in her nightgown. Her once perfect hair streaked with gray and falling loose around her face. She looked up at me, startled but not angry. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks hollow. "You came," she said quietly. "I had to," I replied. Her lips trembled. "I wasn't sure you'd ever step inside this house again. I wasn't sure either." She gestured weakly toward the room behind her. "I can't sleep in there. Too many mirrors." I hesitated, then sat down on the opposite wall, leaving a few feet between us. The silence stretched. She finally broke it. "They froze our accounts. The house is being taken. Your father, he's gone." I looked at her surprised. "Gone? He left last week." "No note, no calls. Just gone." She laughed softly, a sound with no joy. "Said he needed time to think. Men always need time to think when they've destroyed something." Her hands twisted the edge of her robe. "I keep wondering when I stopped being a mother. Maybe when I started being a Calloway instead." "You were both," I said. "And one of them always won." She turned her head, eyes wet. "You think I don't hate what I did to you?" I didn't answer. She looked away. "My mother used to say love means control, that if you don't keep your family in line, the world will eat them alive. She kept us terrified, and I swore I'd never be like her. But fear's contagious, isn't it? I caught it from her, and I passed it to you." Her words trembled, fragile but real. I thought of all the years she'd punished me for speaking, for being too loud, too emotional, too myself. It had always felt personal, but sitting here now, I saw something else, her own brokenness passed down like an heirloom. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope. "Grace gave me this," I said. Caroline's eyes widened slightly. "Grace?" "It's yours," I said, handing it to her. She took it with shaking fingers, staring at the handwriting, her sister's name scrawled across the front. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a letter written decades ago, yellowed and creased. As she read, her lips moved silently. Tears slipped down her cheeks. When she finished, she folded the paper and held it to her chest. "She forgave me," she whispered. "After all these years." "She didn't hate you," I said softly. "She pitied you. There's a difference." She laughed bitterly through her tears. "You sound like her. Maybe that's not a bad thing." She looked at me, something shifting in her expression. For the first time, she seemed small, almost human. "You were always stronger than I knew," she said. "I thought I could control you to keep you safe. I didn't realize you were the one who'd end up saving us. I didn't save anyone, I said. I just stopped lying." She wiped her eyes. "Then that's enough." We sat there for a while, the afternoon light moving across the hallway floor, dust motes dancing like faint ghosts. She reached for my hand, tentative, and I let her. Her skin was cold, her grip frail, but for once it wasn't a demand. It was an apology. "I can't ask you to forgive me," she whispered. "I already did," I said. "Just not for you, for me." Something eased in her face, then a quiet release. I left her sitting there when the sun began to dip, her shoulders slumped but her breathing calm. In the foyer, I paused by the grand mirror. My reflection stared back clear and unflinching. The woman in the glass was not the scared girl who once lived here. She was something harder, steadier, tempered by fire. Outside, Grace was waiting by the car. "Did you find what you needed?" she asked. "I found the truth," I said. "And maybe the ashes of something close to peace." She smiled faintly. "That's how healing starts. With ashes." As we drove away, I looked back one last time. The mansion stood against the dusk, its windows glowing faintly with the last light of day. For a brief second, I imagined my mother standing by one of them, watching me leave, her hand pressed to the glass. Then the house disappeared behind the trees. The road stretched ahead, empty and golden. The scent of salt carried on the wind. Grace reached over and took my hand. "You know forgiveness isn't weakness," she said. "It's what keeps you from becoming them." I nodded. The ache inside me wasn't gone, but it had softened. Maybe that was enough for now. When we reached the cottage, the sea was calm, the horizon washed in pink and silver. I walked down to the water's edge barefoot, the sand cool under my feet. Daniel waited there, his silhouette outlined by the fading sun. He smiled when he saw me, and something in my chest loosened. "Did it help?" he asked. I nodded. It didn't fix anything, but it ended something. He stepped closer, brushing his thumb across my cheek. "Then maybe that's the same thing." I looked out at the waves. The tide rolled in slow and gentle like a heartbeat. "My mother was raised by fear," I said quietly. "And she raised me with it too. But I don't want to pass that down. If I ever have a daughter, I want her to inherit truth instead." Daniel took my hand, his fingers warm around mine. "Then you already broke the curse." The sun slipped below the waterline, leaving the world bathed in gold and twilight. The air felt clean, the future open. I stood there until the stars began to appear, the sound of the sea washing over everything that had once hurt me. Behind me, Grace's light flickered on inside the cottage, soft and steady, a beacon in the dark. Ahead of me, the horizon stretched wide and endless. I closed my eyes and breathed in the salt air. The past was behind me, but its lessons stayed etched into my skin like scars that no longer hurt. When I opened my eyes again, the night felt different, lighter, freer. I wasn't haunted anymore. I was simply alive. The cottage was quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that feels earned. The waves broke gently against the shore beyond the dunes, and the gulls circled lazily above. I woke to the faint smell of coffee drifting in from the kitchen. Grace always woke before me, her body still ruled by decades of early mornings. I lay there for a moment, listening to the sounds of the sea of life moving on. When I finally got up, the light pouring through the curtains was soft, golden, forgiving. Grace sat at the table with her laptop open, glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Morning, honey," she said without looking up. "You made the front page again." I smiled, faintly rubbing sleep from my eyes. "Let me guess, The Bald Bride of Savannah." She chuckled. "Close. From scandal to strength, Emma Calloway's new beginning." She turned the screen toward me. There I was, standing by the water, the photograph from an old charity event they'd repurposed. The headline glittered beneath it, part praise, part intrusion. "I didn't ask for any of this," I said quietly. "I know," Grace said, closing the laptop, "but sometimes the story chooses you. The question is what you do with it." I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitter warmth grounding me. "I just want peace." Grace studied me for a moment. "Peace is good, but peace without purpose turns to silence. And you didn't go through hell to be silent again." Her words lingered as I looked out the window. The ocean stretched endlessly, calm and glimmering. Maybe she was right. Maybe peace wasn't just the absence of pain, it was what you built after it. That afternoon I found myself downtown for the first time in months. The air was thick with summer heat, but the city felt different now. People still stared, sometimes half pity, half admiration, but no one dared whisper. The Calloway name had lost its power to intimidate. I walked past the church where my father once gave sermons about morality. The doors were closed, the stained glass dim. A new notice hung out front under new leadership. I wondered if anyone would ever tell the truth inside those walls again. At the end of the block stood a small building with a for lease sign in the window. The space was narrow, sunlit, and dusty, a forgotten storefront that had once been a bakery. I stood there for a long time, imagining what it could become. A place where women could tell their stories without fear. A place where silence wasn't the price of belonging. That night, I told Grace about it. She listened quietly, then smiled. "The Magnolia Project," she said, as if the name had already existed somewhere in her mind. "Because we bloom in our own time." 2 weeks later, the keys were in my hand. We cleaned it ourselves, painting the walls pale cream, hanging lace curtains that fluttered in the ocean breeze. The old wooden counter became a desk stacked with papers and letters. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the scent of magnolia candles we placed on every shelf. Daniel came by on weekends, fixing shelves, hanging lights, his quiet presence, a kind of comfort I hadn't realized I missed. On the day of the opening, only a handful of people came, women of different ages, strangers who had read about the story online. They brought tears, tremors, and courage. One by one, they shared what they had been through. An older woman spoke about her husband's cruelty. A young mother confessed that her family had disowned her for leaving an arranged marriage. A teenage girl admitted she'd been too afraid to tell anyone about the pressure at home. We didn't offer answers, we just listened. Sometimes that was enough. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't rehearse. I told them that the Calloway name didn't end with me, it ended with the silence that came before me. I told them that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a whisper that refuses to die. After the gathering, one woman stayed behind. Her name was Clara, a widow with kind eyes and trembling hands. She touched my arm and said softly, "You gave me the courage to tell my daughter the truth about her father." Her voice cracked. "You gave me permission to start over." I smiled, but when she left, I cried. For her. For all of them. For the version of me who once believed starting over was impossible. In the evenings when the building emptied and the candles flickered low, Daniel would come by to walk me home. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. We didn't need to. His presence was a reminder that love, when real, doesn't demand perfection. It heals quietly in its own time. One night, as we walked along the boardwalk, he said, "You've turned pain into something living. Not everyone can do that." I'm just trying to make sure it meant something, I said. He stopped and took my hand. It already does. Days bled into weeks, and the Magnolia Project grew. Local papers began covering it not as gossip, but as a movement. Letters arrived from women across the South, letters full of hurt, hope, and healing. Each one reminded me that my story wasn't unique. It was just the one that finally refused to stay buried. Then one afternoon, as I sorted mail at the office, the bell over the door rang. Lily stood there holding a paper bag in both hands. She looked thinner, quieter, her once polished beauty dulled by regret. "Hi," she said softly. I froze for a second before stepping forward. "Hi," she smiled awkwardly. I didn't know where else to go. "You came to the right place," I said. We sat at the counter, the air thick, with everything unspoken. She took out the contents of the bag, a framed photo of the two of us, as little girls sitting under the magnolia tree behind the mansion. Our hair was tangled, our faces smudged with dirt, but we were laughing. "I kept it," she said. "Through everything. I thought maybe you'd want it." I traced the edge of the frame with my finger. "I remember that day," I said. "We buried a time capsule under that tree. You swore you'd become a singer. And you said you'd become president," she said with a small laugh. "Guess we both ended up doing something different." Her eyes glistened. "I'm sorry, Emma. I was weak. I let them turn me into something I'm not." "You don't have to be sorry anymore," I said gently. "You just have to be better." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I reached out and squeezed her hand. It wasn't forgiveness in that moment, it was understanding. Sometimes that's all forgiveness really is. After she left, I hung the photo in the office. The two little girls beneath the magnolia tree watched over us as we built something new. Months passed. The project flourished. The Callaway Mansion was sold to a developer who planned to turn it into a historical museum. The irony wasn't lost on me. When they called to ask if I wanted to donate anything for display, I sent them the veil I'd worn at my wedding, the one that revealed instead of hiding. On the anniversary of that day, we held a gathering at the Magnolia Project. Grace gave a speech, her voice firm and proud. Daniel stood in the back smiling. When it was my turn to speak, I said revenge gave me justice, but forgiveness gave me peace. This place exists so that no woman ever has to choose between the two again. After the applause, I walked outside. The magnolia trees around the square were in bloom, their white petals glowing in the moonlight. I breathed in their scent, sweet, strong, alive. Grace joined me, slipping her arm through mine. "You've come a long way, baby girl," she said. I smiled. "We both have." She squeezed my hand. "Just remember, healing isn't a finish line. It's a direction. Keep walking it." I nodded, looking out at the horizon. For the first time in my life, the future didn't scare me. It was wide open, waiting. The wind lifted my hair, gently carrying with it the scent of salt and magnolias. Somewhere inside, laughter echoed a sound I hadn't recognized in years. It was mine. And this time it was real. The land where the Callaway Mansion once stood was unrecognizable. The gardens were gone, the marble driveway overgrown with grass, and where the great house had loomed, there was only open air and silence. A single plaque stood in the middle of the clearing, shining faintly in the sunlight. I stepped closer and read the engraving, "The Callaway Estate, a legacy of lessons learned." I traced the letters with my fingertips, feeling their weight. The ground beneath my feet used to terrify me. Now it felt like forgiveness. The wind carried the scent of magnolias from the nearby trees, soft and warm. I knelt down and placed a single bloom beside the plaque, pressing the petals gently into the soil. "You finally became something honest," I whispered. The crunch of footsteps made me turn. Daniel was walking up the path, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. His tie fluttered in the breeze, and when he saw me, he smiled, that patient, quiet smile that had carried me through the storm. "Couldn't stay away, could you?" he said, handing me a cup. "I thought I'd feel something," I said, looking back at the empty space. "Anger, maybe? Or grief? But it's just quiet. Maybe that's peace," he said. I nodded, watching the light shift across the field. It used to feel like they owned everything here, even the air. Now it's just a place, no ghosts left. He looked at me thoughtfully. You think that's true, I smiled faintly. Maybe not. Maybe ghosts don't disappear. Maybe they just stop scaring you. We walked together along the old driveway, the crunch of gravel beneath our shoes echoing in the stillness. The silence between us was comfortable, filled with understanding instead of words. When we reached the edge of the property, I turned back one last time. The horizon shimmered with sunlight, washing the memory of the mansion into gold. It's strange, I said softly. I used to think revenge would feel like victory, but it doesn't. It feels like balance. Daniel took my hand. Balance is a good place to start. A month later, the Magnolia Project celebrated its first anniversary. The center was alive with laughter music and the hum of stories being shared. The once empty room now overflowed with voices, women of every age sitting in circles telling truths they had hidden for too long. Grace stood at the front, radiant in a floral dress, her hair silver in the sunlight. 1 year ago, she said, this started as an act of defiance. Today it stands as an act of love. The applause was warm and genuine. I sat in the front row beside Daniel, feeling my chest swell with pride. When Grace gestured for me to come up, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. I looked at the faces in front of me, faces marked with both pain and resilience. I once thought my story was about revenge, I began. But revenge ends. Healing doesn't. Healing keeps moving, changing, growing like the magnolias outside. A ripple of quiet filled the room. I could see women nodding, tears shining in their eyes. I was raised to believe that truth was dangerous, I said, my voice steady. That it ruins families' reputations, legacies. But the truth doesn't ruin us, it reveals us. It shows us what's real, and sometimes that's the first step toward being free. Someone began to clap, then another, until the room filled with applause. I smiled through it, not out of pride, but gratitude. When the applause faded, I added softly, "Thank you for letting my story be the beginning of yours." After the event, when most of the guests had left, I found an envelope tucked inside my bag. The handwriting stopped me, cold, my father's. For a long time I just stared at it, unsure if I wanted to know what he had written. But eventually curiosity won. His letter was brief. "I won't ask for forgiveness. I know what I've lost. You were right, truth is heavier than power, but it's the only thing that lasts. Whatever happens to me now, I hope you find peace. You've earned it." I folded the letter and set it on Grace's desk. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to respond. Some stories don't need an ending. They just need silence to rest in. That evening, I walked along the beach. The sky was streaked with shades of rose and gold, the sea whispering secrets to the shore. I thought of my mother somewhere in another town, living quietly away from all this. I thought of Lily, who now volunteered part-time at the project, slowly building her own redemption. And I thought of the frightened girl who once woke up bald and betrayed, and how that girl had unknowingly started a revolution. Grace joined me after a while, her sandals sinking into the sand beside me. "You did what none of us could," she said gently. "I just told the truth," I said. "That's exactly what I mean." We stood together watching the waves roll in. The last light of day shimmered across the water, and for the first time I felt entirely at home in my own skin. Later that night I sat before the old mirror in the cottage. My reflection stared back, familiar, now almost kind. I touched the short strands of hair framing my face, remembering the horror of seeing my bare head for the first time. The woman in the glass no longer looked broken. She looked free. I smiled. "You made it," I whispered to the reflection. "You finally made it." Grace's voice floated in from the kitchen. "You ready for tomorrow?" I turned from the mirror, my heart light. More than ever. The next morning, the Magnolia Project opened its doors again, filled with the sound of new beginnings. I greeted each woman who walked in with the same quiet promise: "You are not alone." In the afternoon, I spoke to a new group gathered around the table. Their faces reminded me of mine a year ago, uncertain, fragile, brave. I told them, "You don't need to be perfect to be strong. You just need to show up for yourself." Every time you speak the truth, you plant something that will outlive fear. The room went still. A few women smiled. Others wiped their eyes. As the sun lowered through the windows, petals from the magnolia tree outside drifted past the glass, swirling gently to the ground. I paused, watching them fall. Then I looked back at the women in front of me. "If my story reminded you of your own," I said softly, "don't let it end here. Tell yours, write it, share it, because silence only wins when we stop listening." I smiled and added, "And if you believe every truth deserves to be told, stay, listen. There are more stories waiting to bloom." The camera would have lingered there if this were a film. The magnolia petals falling, the sea humming in the distance, my voice fading into the sound of laughter and soft music. But it wasn't a movie. It was life, messy, painful, and astonishingly beautiful. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to live it.